Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. I'm Dr. Gale and I'm glad to have you here today. So what we're looking at today is something that will inevitably happen in your career at some point. You've gone ahead and you've developed out these lessons, they're great, you've built them inside the LMS, everything's running smooth. Then all of a sudden somebody tells you that you've got to switch LMSs. You're going to have to switch into a completely new system. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to navigate that LMS switch when it's been mandated on you that you have to do so. So as we go through today, what we're going to talk about specifically is we want to look at why we would maybe have to switch between LMSs. If we are going to have to switch, we're going to talk a little bit about what we want to look for inside of the LMS to determine whether or not we do actually want to switch. And then lastly, if it's pushed on us, we want to talk about how we go about managing a switch from an LMS on both an overall level, the things we need to look at, and on an individual level. If I'm just teaching a few classes, what do I have to do at that point to make life easier for me? So that's what we're going to talk about throughout this. So let's go ahead and start with looking at why we might need to switch LMSs over time. So one of the reasons that obviously we might have to switch LMS becomes cost. These things can be extremely expensive for schools depending on their size, for school systems, for districts, all that kind of stuff. Usually it's based on the number of students that will be inside of a system. So again, if you've got a really big school or a really big school district, the cost can go up. So as competitors start coming in, a lot of times they're going to offer you at least introductory rates that are very, very promising for an expanded period of time, maybe 3 to 5 years, something like that. And that can be a huge cost savings over that time. So inevitably you might jump back and forth a little bit, but one way or the other, if you can get that cost down through negotiations or by switching over to an LMS, a lot of times school districts need to do that, especially in times where budgets are cut and stuff like that. It's just a good expense that can be saved. So cost is definitely one that will have us switching back and forth a lot. Also, as new competitors start coming on the market, enhanced features, better other enhancements like collaboration, things like that just start being built into the system natively. So you can do more inside of the system to build better learning experiences for the students. And so one way or another, if you can get that better learning experience by switching over to an LMS because it has new features, it has new enhancements, it has things that can make you do your job better, then again, it's a reason that sometimes we look at switching. Sometimes those older systems that have been on top of the market for a long time, they get stagnant, and so they don't have the innovation that some of these new ones coming in do. So again, we end up looking at those to see if we can use some of those new innovations to just make everything better for us and our students. Another thing that happens a lot of times are some of these corporations end up merging, or they end up being acquired by another organization or something like that. So one of the big ones in the past was you used to have Angel was an LMS, you used to have Blackboard, and then there was one other one, WebCT. Those were like the three originals. Well, eventually, as new ones started coming on the market, Angel and WebCT were bought by Blackboard. So they all ended up having to be converted to Blackboard. If you were on Angel, you ended up having to go to Blackboard because Blackboard cut the service and the support for Angel and merged it into their product. So if a company gets absorbed by another company, you might have a little bit of time where you can stay on the same system, but eventually that system will be cut with the company that ended up purchasing it. And then lastly, you may just get new leadership in your district or your school that came from another institution or organization that had a different LMS, and they really liked it. They saw benefits, they saw positives from it, and so once they end up becoming in charge of your organization, they may push that new LMS onto the organization one way or the other. And so again, eventually what that means for you is you may have to switch just because the leadership and the bosses decided it's time to move to this one that is better. Again, for a variety of reasons, but one way or the other, it worked at my old organization, it worked at my old school system, so we're going to put it in at this school system too. So once that contract you're on runs out, usually they'll try to push the switch to the new software one way or the other. So there are reasons out there that we end up looking for change, and we realize that we have to change these things. But let's say that we know we're going to have to change. What are some of the things that we want to look for in a new LMS if we're going to have to make that change? So when we're looking at the different LMSs and trying to figure out whether or not we want to make a change, again, kind of almost at a district level, not at an individual instructor level, again, cost savings are a big one. If we can save some costs throughout this whole process, you might be able to save a couple $100,000 over multi-years, which ends up being like a $500,000 over 3 years. That's a lot of money that can be put towards other things. So again, if they're doing equivalently the same, they've got good backgrounds on them, they both are good, reputable companies, then saving $500,000 on that may be worth looking at doing a switch. So cost savings, again, will always play a factor in this. Then we actually have to look at not just the features that they're trying to sell us, but we need to determine what features we actually would use in the LMS. So they could have 100 different things that are incredible and awesome, and the salespeople make it sound just like the best thing you've ever seen. But if we're only going to use 5 of them, that 5 may be equivalent throughout all of the LMS systems that are out there, including other competitors that are cheaper. So they'll always build on new enhancements and new features, but if a majority of the instructors and teachers and students aren't going to use those features, it doesn't really matter. So only look at the features that you really think you're going to use. Otherwise, only your power users are going to use the rest, and they're going to figure out how to do it in one system one way or the other. Then you got to look at how many users you're going to have on there and how are you going to train the users. So if you're moving over to a new LMS, especially if you do use a lot of those extra features and all that kind of stuff, you're going to have to train those instructors that are used to using them in your LMS to move to the new LMS. Now you may be able to get the company to bring in trainers, but you're probably going to have to pay them. So that starts cutting into that cost savings that you may get from switching over. And they'll say that they'll give you materials and all this and everything moves smoothly, and it does for the most part. But again, the more advanced you get, the more things that will probably break when you transfer stuff over. So if you're just putting up basic pages, probably is going to transfer over pretty easy. But if you're trying to do a lot of collaboration and you're using some of the peer review tools, all those type of things, probably more things are going to break, so you have to prep for that on the training and the transfer. And that's the next piece you need to think about. How many courses are you going to have to transfer? Are you at a major school system that has, hundreds and hundreds of professors and all of them teach 4 or 5 different classes? All these teachers are going to have to transfer that content over, and if all of them are hitting hiccups, it's got to fall on the tech people at some point to be able to make that work. So you're going to end up having this disruption where people are going to be upset when things don't work. How many people are you talking? How many classes are you talking? These are all considerations that you have to put into it. If I have 500 people that are just yelling at me daily and angry, is it worth $500,000 over 3 years, or do I really want more like $1.5 million savings to have to deal with that mess? It all depends, but you got to put all those factors in there when you're looking at having to switch over on an LMS system. So let's go ahead and say, all right, the decision's been made, we're switching. So you got 6 months, we're going to have to switch to the new system. It's going to happen. What do we do once we have that decision made? What do we need to start looking at to get things switched? So let's look at it from an organization perspective first. The first thing is, do we want to actually transfer the courses over, or do we want to look at kind of starting over from scratch? So say we've got a lot of files that are already saved. We have them as the original Word documents. Is it going to be easier and cleaner to just start populating those into the new system versus taking what was in the old stuff and just pushing it and trying to move it over? What happens if you have a class that has been built in an old system and you try to transfer it, most of the stuff will probably be there, but you're going to have to go back through and look and clean it up and do all this stuff anyways just to make it look exactly like what you wanted. The equivalent is trying to take something that was like built in Google Docs or PDF or something like that and then move it into Word. It kind of looks right, but all the formatting and all the things that you like to put in there probably aren't going to match up exactly. So even if you transfer it in, you're going to have to clean it up. So then the question becomes, okay, if I've got a lot of that original source, is it maybe easier for me to go ahead and populate that stuff in and build it again from scratch rather than having to move it and clean it anyways? There's no right or wrong answer to that. Again, a lot of that comes down to the complexity of the class that you're trying to move. So you just kind of have to make that determination on your own. One thing that I keep saying there is, do we have those original source files? As you're building things, if we have the original source files, the Word documents we started with, the PDFs we started with, the test banks we started with, it is a lot easier to go ahead and transfer that stuff over, because if something breaks, we can clear it out and just rebuild that one piece. So maybe the whole class comes over, but the tests end up breaking. They're just not working right because it didn't have the features that we need. Okay, well, let's go back to our original test bank and try and pull that back in and build it from scratch. The whole rest of the course is there. We'll just link it all together on the back side. If you don't have those original source files, it gets it's an easier decision because you got to transfer it over, but then the cleanup gets a lot harder because there's nothing to go back to and reference. So always try and keep those source files as you're building originally, just so if you ever have to do the LMS switch, it's easier to move that stuff over. Then you got to think about learning the new features. Okay, so the classes have transferred over, but do I want to use some of these features they sold me on? How do I implement that into the class? How do I start building that into the class? What we'll usually say is, hey, get all the classes over first, then go ahead and start looking at, do you want to add in the new features that they sold you on? And that way, at least you know you've got a class that's working because it functionally worked in the last thing. Now I can start trying to get the enhancements and build things stronger and better. So again, transfer your class first, then start worrying about the enhanced features. Don't try to get these enhanced features that they sold you on to work until the class is up and running and you know you got a product there that can at least get out to the students. Then enhance it after that. Then you got decisions on other content. Again, one of the good things that happens during an LMS switch, especially if you rebuild from scratch, is it makes you look at all your content again. So maybe you've had a class that's populated in there and you've taught it so long that you don't realize it's been 4 or 5 years and the content actually has kind of updated some. Well, doing an LMS switch, especially if you build it from scratch, or you have to go in and physically look at it to clean up, it gives you that opportunity to go ahead and start adding in new content, rebuilding the course with the correct updated content. It's just that kind of like time where it's like, hey, I'm gonna have to move this stuff over anyways because basically it's happening, it's forced on me. Let's go ahead and update the class while we're doing that so that we know everything's starting to refresh from that point. So again, you can start looking at getting your content updated. And I'd actually recommend looking at updating your content before putting the new features in as well. So I'd say transfer your class so you know you got something there, update the content on top of that, then start looking at your new features. That way, again, you've got a good class that's working. It's a better class because now it's been updated. Now you've got new features making it the best class possible. So that's the order that I'd try and take those things in. Now let's look at it from an instructor's perspective. We know this thing is about to happen. We know we're going to have to do an LMS switch at some point in our careers. How do we prep ourselves now when building our classes so that that eventual change is a lot easier on us? And there's a couple little tips and tricks you can do. Again, as I've been saying throughout the video, one of the big things is make sure you save your source files. Have those Word documents somewhere. Have those rubrics. Have those test banks. Have those have all of that stuff over on the side somewhere, stored on a file, stored on your computer, stored in the cloud, whatever, so that if an LMS change happens and it does not come over seamlessly, you're not starting from square zero. You can still pull your source files, update them, and start putting them back into the new LMS. All right, that will save you a ton of time on its own. Then let's look at the basic tools. Start trying to build with the basic things. Build with attaching the Word document. Build with attaching the PDF. Build it inside of the system. Don't go out and start trying to build in all these super fancy softwares that may not push into the new LMS. Build within the LMS first. Then again, once you have it in there, it's maturing, you know you're going to be in the LMS for another 3 or 4 years because a new contract got signed, then start adding in all these outside third-party tools like your Padlets, and if you want to try and connect in a Google Doc, all that stuff. But if you build with basically the HTML pages within the LMS, linking files inside the LMS and linking to external web pages, things like that, then you're going to be a million times easier to transfer over than if you start adding in all these third-party software things that you have on the outside. So start basic, get the fundamentals of design well put into the class, then you can start adding on the extra tech tools that may not transfer over as easy. Then start making a list of your advanced items. So you know that your basic content, like your attachments, your links, all that stuff is going to transfer over fairly easily. But what about if I use self and peer assessment? What if I use adaptive releases? What if I start integrating in third-party textbook software? Those type of things may not transfer over as easy. So as you're building out your classes, start making a list of the things you feel are more advanced and not the common things that you've seen in other classes. That way, whenever you make the LMS switch, you can go back and refer to that list that you made of advanced features, and you can start going to just those individual items in the classes and double checking that they work. That way you're not having to search through an entire class to try and find the 5 things that you're really most concerned about working. So as you build your class originally, make that list of advanced features so you can go back in and double check whether or not those are the features that actually are still working in the class or not. Then lastly, make a list of your third-party tools. So it's not just the advanced tools inside of the LMS that you want to have that list with, but if you're tying in textbooks or advanced lesson developers or plagiarism detection or proctoring software, all those third-party tools, start making a list of the ones that you're using within the LMS, and that way again, once it transfers over, you can go in and double check just those tools that you'd be more worried about not transferring over, and it's a lot faster to be able to just go down that checklist on those things that you think might be broken in the class rather than the things that you're fairly confident would have come over easily. So again, make an advanced list of the features that you're using from the LMS, make a list of the third-party tools you're tying into the LMS. Then double check those after you've rolled a class over. Saves you a ton of time. So that's getting a little bit long. Let me go ahead and wrap this thing up. Again, what I'm hoping you got out of this is you will eventually face an LMS shift. Whether or not you change a job into a new organization that has a different LMS, whether or not somebody or some force comes in that forces your current organization to change into an LMS, you're going to have to switch at some point. So go ahead and start prepping for it. You know the reasons, hopefully, that we need to switch to the new LMSs. You know what to look for in an LMS when we're trying to decide whether or not to switch. So if you're on a committee or something, you know the specific things to look for. Then you know what it kind of takes for the organization to switch over, and how to prep yourself as an individual instructor, that when you're developing these classes out, you know what to store on the sides, that if the LMS switch happens, you can easily and more effectively move your classes over to the new LMS. So that hopefully will wrap it up a little bit. Hopefully you guys got something new out of this. And if you guys have anything else that you have questions on this or anything, feel free to go ahead and put it down in the comment box or reach out to us. Otherwise, if you guys have any other tech things or design things that you guys would like to know, go ahead and leave those down or reach out to us as well, and we'll try to make a video for that. Again, what we're shooting for in the end of this is trying to get you guys the information that can help you make the best learning experiences for your students as possible. So that's what we want to make sure that we're shooting these videos for. If you guys need anything else, let us know. Otherwise, we appreciate you spending the time with us today. Good luck as you design and you build these things out.